background would really influence who I am as a person and the decisions that I ended up making. If I could be that bridge to help these people, like different people, connect to one another and share their experiences and learn about different cultures and kind of make the strange familiar, I guess my teaching philosophy is, or an aspect of it is anyway.
Welcome to the Kaizen Blueprint podcast, where we explore topics for continuous personal growth and improvement.
Maria, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, Aldo, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So we have a lot to talk about, but first, we're going to talk about triathlon, we're going to talk about language learning, but first, let's talk about your history.
Sure.
You're coming from an immigrant family. Your father's from Argentina and your mother is from Ecuador, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And I want to talk about how being in an immigrant family led you to pursuing more academics versus the athletics attributes.
Sure, of course. So again, thank you so much for having me here and for allowing me the opportunity to share my story. I just think that representation is so important. And that's one of the reasons why I like telling my story, just so more stories like these can be heard and shared. So particularly my immigrant experience. I mean, that's not new. There are people, this country was founded on immigration, but I think how we make our path is so important. And with my parents coming from working class backgrounds, having to navigate a new country, new language, new culture, new customs, and with the ultimate purpose of trying to have a better life for us, for my brother and I. And so where they thought opportunity lied was actually in education. So they really pushed academics for us as the path to success. For them, the model of success was going to pursue higher education. So what this meant in practice was, just this focus on grades, this focus on academic performance, meaning that there was little room for anything else. So for somebody like me who was very active as a little kid, going out in Upper Darby, Delco, where I'm from, we lived in a row home. There were other little kids that lived on the street, and we would just play outside until the lights would come on. That's when we would be allowed to go inside. I would just play tag. I was running. I was always really, really active. I guess for me, that was really like, it was like a sacred space, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like the fun, the enjoyment still stayed as fun and enjoyment. I didn't really see it as something that I could another avenue for success as some, the Olympics are going on right now. And clearly some people have done amazing things with their physical abilities, but that just wasn't even in the cards for me. It wasn't even in my radar. I guess what saved me then, and I've had this conversation with another friend, Ed Chang, where we talked about this, what would have happened if we had been active when we were younger. We wondered if we would enjoy it as much now as adults, or if we would be burned out. So in a way, my parents' plan kind of worked, because I'm in a position now where I've been able to, enjoy the fruits of my labor. And one of those fruits is to be able to pursue the active lifestyle that I've always wanted to pursue.
Awesome. And how did they push you into being more into academics as opposed to the athletics, despite the fact that you were running and playing around in your neighborhood?
Yeah. So I think it was just always like, okay, you have your time to go outside and play or whatever else, but you need to come home, you need to do your homework. It was that consistency, that knowing that there was a certain time that I was allowed to play outside, and that, okay, at this particular time you have to come back in and you have to work. So that also helped with tenaciousness and just being hardworking, being dedicated. This hour is my homework hour. We're working. And my parents also too, because of the language barriers, it was kind of on me. I had to figure it out myself. And so that also led to agency and autonomy. I kind of knew how to push myself. And if I didn't, unfortunately, the internet didn't exist then, but I did have other people on my street that I knew could help. And so that aspect of it, I guess I haven't really shared before, but like even that sense of community on your street, your neighbors helping you, was really beneficial for my upbringing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think within like an immigrant family, you see your mother or father or whoever in that same family, they work really hard. So that kind of influence you to work really hard too. And I think in America, it's like one of the only, if not the only country that have the athletic attributes to be somewhat in a spectacle as opposed to the academics, because I know I'm coming from an Asian background, and we were always, I remember back then before I moved to the United States, we would have 6 days of school.
6 days of school.
6 days of school, yeah.
Talk about hard work.
So it was a lot of educational pursuits. And even though you're good at basketball or any type of sports, especially in Indonesia, that's great, but that's not put into like the #1 ranking.
Sure.
Like they prefer someone who have a straight A's as opposed to someone who's really good in a particular sport. But in America, it's complete opposite, where you can be really good at sports and you can pursue that and you get scholarship for it, and that could get you into a particular school.
For sure, for sure. And it wasn't something that, again, that was on my radar until I was in high school. And I think by that point, unfortunately it was too late, but then again, it's a mixed blessing because I get to pursue it now. It's never too late. So.
Yeah, yeah. So before we start pursuing your athletic attributes, we'll do that later in a show. But talking about school, you had straight A's and you had a scholarship to go to Penn State.
Yes, I had a partial scholarship for Penn State. And so that was really gratifying in itself, that all of this hard work that I'd put in my primary school years was paving the way for higher education.
And you first started to learn about kinesiology, right? That was your pursuit initially in Penn State, and then you switched major?
Yeah, so actually it was an interesting journey. I was actually an art major, a visual arts major. In high school, I had taken advanced placement art. I had gotten a scholarship to go to Moore College of Art and Design, and would take classes there on the weekends. I really thought that I was going to pursue the arts. And I realized while I was up at Penn State that it was something that I enjoyed doing as a hobby. I didn't really like having others tell me how to do my art. So because of that, I was like, okay, well, what else am I interested in? And kinesiology, movement science, really spoke to me. I really enjoyed the classes, and particularly any strength training classes that I had taken. I changed direction though when I realized that there was a little bit more to it. Like I had to take like chemistry and biology, and I'm like, sciences unfortunately are not my strength. So
Same for me.
So I'm glad I'm not alone with that. But there is so much more that you can pursue. I know we kind of think about STEM, and I'm not knocking STEM. I think it's really important, but I just think of that Dead Poets Society with like Robin Williams, who's like, these are noble pursuits like STEM and law and medicine and stuff. But what really brings joy or a sense of humanity is the arts. And so in another way, I was able to pursue that, and that was through linguistics and language, being able to learn about how language, I guess the intricacies of it from an analytic perspective, but also seeing its application and, through writing, through literature, it just really thrilled me whenever I made that connection and I realized how important language learning is for everybody.
And in regards to language learning, you had a deeper why, right? It was for the fact that I believe your family felt like their English wasn't good enough, and then you pursued the language learning in order to help them, or is that kind of the reason why?
Yeah, I didn't realize how much my background would really influence who I am as a person and the decisions that I ended up making. Yeah, that's exactly it. Growing up, I was the mini mom, I guess. Firstborn, first generation American, helping my parents navigate the system, with medicine, with bills, with all of these things, really gave me a sense of appreciation of how language can give us access to certain assets or aspects of our life. So, for example, oh, sorry.
It's okay.
So, when I made that connection, how important language can be to access different spaces. And I mean, I'm thinking about it from my parents' perspective, but also to like being able to speak Spanish and like make a connection with my family members in Latin America, or being able to connect with people in the US that I guess like my other peers that were monolingual wouldn't or couldn't, gave me the sense of appreciation of, okay, like if I could be that bridge to help these people, like different people connect to one another, and share their experiences and learn about different cultures and kind of make the strange familiar. That's kind of what I guess my teaching philosophy is, or an aspect of it is anyway.
Yeah, and in terms of pursuing that studies, right? Tell us more about the sandwich shop.
Yeah. So I was about to graduate, and I wasn't sure where. I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I knew I didn't want to go right away. So I had spent the summer that I was going to graduate trying to figure out what the heck my plan was going to be. So I was working in a sandwich shop that summer, and wouldn't you know that the head of my department comes in, orders a sandwich, is so happy to see me. I'm happy to see her. And she's asking me about my plans after I graduate. And, I'm like, ugh, like I roll, like I hate talking about this, but sure, I'll entertain the question. And the way that I phrased it was, I'm open to many options at this point. And then that's when she was like, how would you like to teach it in our Spanish department here? And I thought she was joking. And like, I think she saw my face and she was like, no, really, like, would you like to teach here? And I was so shocked that I like dropped the knife that I was using to make her sandwich. And then she pretty much offered me an interview and told me to follow up with the director of the Spanish program. And then from there, it just went so quickly. Had the interview, hired on the spot, graduated, and then like a week later, transitioned to from sitting at a desk in a classroom to being in front of the classroom teaching.
Wow. And you enjoyed the teaching aspect?
I have to say it was such a learning curve because I may seem very bubbly and extroverted now, but when I was younger, I was a little bit more like shy and introverted. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I hated public speaking. Like, how is this going to work? I'm going to have to talk to students and explain things to them. And that was a very, very humbling experience for sure. I think the first day of class, classes were only 50 minutes long. I said everything I needed to say in 40 minutes.
Yep.
And then students came up to me at the end of class and were like, I think I'm in the wrong level of Spanish. And I'm like, oh my God, I was probably talking so fast because I was just so nervous.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
yeah.
But that's kind of paved your way into where you are now teaching in UPenn, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. It's so interesting because now teaching is so second nature to me. I just kind of show up and no, I don't want to make it seem like that. Like I've just gotten so comfortable with it. And I think more than anything, it's just kind of being in tune with the students and reading the room and knowing like I have the knowledge. They, need to work with the knowledge. So give them the opportunities to work with the knowledge. There's all roads lead to Rome. There's more than one way to do things.
Sure.
So as long as you kind of have the purpose in your mind, like what is the objective today? And then afterwards being like, okay, so here is this concept, this objective. How do we operationalize that? What is the product? What is the deliverable that they'll have to produce that day to show that they have worked through the material? And then I just give them different options. I give them different resources. I'm a resource. They're resources in themselves. I think that's so important for them. And again, kind of going back to this whole community aspect where you're helping each other. Like, I can only help for so much. And yes, I have the experience and the training or whatever else, but like their classmates are resources as well. And family members and community members outside of the classroom. I just kind of view the classroom as this part, like a simulation of like the outside. And this is the space where we work together through something. This is the space where we ask questions that like we might be embarrassed to ask outside. And this is the space where we work through things in order for it to make sense for them, in order for them to feel like they can carry that and use that outside of the classroom.
Got it. Yeah, I feel like in a classroom, sometimes you get confined and sometimes you're being forced into being there, but it seems you have methodology and structures in your mind in order for like someone or like a student to feel comfortable in their own classroom.
For sure. There is, I'm going to kind of refer to my notes here. I really love quotes. I love what other people have said because they can really kind of get to the grain of what I want to express. But even in my own, for as much as I love language, I have my own limitations of what, we have all these feelings, but we can only put labels on so many of them. So this is a quote from Maya Angelou that I really liked. So people will forget what you said, what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's just so important, where not only am I giving them the training, I guess the students, the opportunities, these meaning-making opportunities, but I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel good in the classroom. I want them to feel success. I want them to fail. And through those failures, they can understand hopefully what they can do to improve the next time. That's where we really learn. That's where we really reflect. But I don't know if all of these things can really happen if they're not in a space where they feel good. So I put a premium on that for sure in my class.
Got it.
Sense of community is part of that.
Awesome. And what do you teach in the class? Is it Spanish or?
So I used to teach in the Spanish department at Penn. I taught there for 6 years, from beginner Spanish, like this is the first time they're taking the class, to literature classes at a more advanced level. Now I'm in the English language programs and I am all over the place there. But I would say that the main thing that I do is that I help students become more effective communicators, whether it be like graduate students, doctoral students that like they know the technical vocabulary and jargon of their specific field, but they have to also learn how to like talk to the general public, people that are not in their field. So helping them translate their work so they're able to speak to a wider audience, to helping students give more effective presentations and communicate their point effectively. Again, going back to that Maya Angelou quote on how you make somebody feel, that's a really important presentation skill. It's not just, the content that you're delivering, but it's how you deliver it and the emotion behind that that's so important.
Got it. Any tips on probably three or so ways to effectively communicate?
I never underestimate eye contact, which is an area, admittedly, where I struggle very much. I also think just the power of storytelling and just starting out with a story. I think as human beings, we're wired for stories. We love hearing a good story. It's through storytelling where we learn about the world. It's where we build trust with people and knowledge gets passed down. So never underestimate like starting off your presentation with something personal, so you can make that connection with your audience.
Yeah. So having eye contact and storytelling.
Storytelling. And then the last thing as well is to convey enthusiasm. I've been kind of putting my hands in my lap, but I've also been using my hands as well to talk. And that's one way where you can draw enthusiasm for what you have to say. Using your hands, our eyes kind of gravitate to our hands. Dancers use their hands a lot because they know that that's where humans' eyes go. If you use your hands while you talk, it helps with like the cadence of your speech, and it helps with clarity, and people can understand what you're trying to say better. And not only that, but it conveys enthusiasm and confidence. So I always tell my students to try to use their hands, not to overdo it either, like
just going all crazy and stuff.
just somewhere in the middle, Goldilocks, where it feels right to use gestures, use them. But the power of multimodal communication cannot be underestimated. 86 or 90% of communication is nonverbal.
Yes, absolutely.
So
it's the tone of voice, right? It's the body language. The verbal actually is just a small percentage of the entire communication spectrum.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So important to develop that as well. And that's one of the space, like the classroom is one such space where that can be developed.
Yeah. In terms of communication, I actually learned a lot about communicating as well. I didn't really go to school for it, but I did a lot of homework behind for my own. And one of the things that helped me a lot was watching TED Talk, reading the TED Talk book, because when you're giving out a TED Talk, you're limited to 18 minutes. And when you're limited to 18 minutes, you got to get your point across.
Right.
And you're in an audience where it's super, super quiet. And you have to capture their attention within the first 5-10 seconds. And people do either quotes, jokes, even storytelling, and then they get their point across.
Sure.
And another communication tool that I think is super, super effective is taking improv class.
Say more about that.
Last year, honestly, this was for dating purposes. but also for public speaking, it helped a lot. So last year, I think I was listening to a podcast, and it was like, go to an improv class. If you want to be funnier, if you want to have conversations, go to improv class. Because someone like me, coming from like a business background in a way, we're always future thinking. We're always thinking about what we're going to say. And sometimes when you're approaching, like, for example, like a woman or your potential partner, you overthink yourself, and sometimes it comes off as weird, or you're like, oh, this is so embarrassing. But when you take improv, it's the opposite effect, where improv
Grounds you?
Yeah. And it's obviously short for improvisation. And the meaning of that is you're in a moment.
Sure.
You know, whatever happens, and you have to react to it. And when taking improv, you don't know, and when you're in a set, right? You don't know what your partner is going to say. You don't know what you're going to say in response. You don't know what act it's going to be, except for the first few seconds. And whatever happens, you just have to react to it and make sure it's funny.
Yeah.
But most of the time, when improv is funny, you don't intend it to be funny. Because if you think so much about trying to be funny, it end up not going that way. It's the weirdest thing.
That's so interesting. Yes, it really forces you to be present in the moment and listening to what the person's saying, so you can then respond to it. So.
And improv is super fun. And I think as people who want to be funnier or having conversations, obviously improv you keep going and going and going. You do a lot of yes and, right?
Yeah.
You agree, and then you expand on what the statement is.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I'm glad that you pointed that out, Aldo, because that's what I tell my students, even with language learning. Like, tell me more is my favorite phrase. So, even with like a simple yes/no question, it's like, well, tell me more. Why did you think that? Not only does that help them with their language abilities, but also ultimately building connections. That's why they want to learn a language. They want to build connections of some sort. And one way to do that is to just expanding on your answers. So,
exactly.
So yeah, I'm seeing connections between improv and language learning right there.
Yeah. And when it comes to language learning, what are some difficulties or misconceptions that some students or people want to learn a language might have?
So I hear people say all the time, like, oh, like, I'm just not good at languages or whatever else, or like like my brain's like too, whatever. And I think it's one thing that's really important is to really try to kind of change your mindset with that. There is, now I can't remember the person's name. So this person on Instagram, I think his name's Jefferson something, but like he talks about the growth mindset and using yet, the word yet in your phrasing. So like, I haven't learned that yet, or I don't know that yet. But that kind of opens you up to possibilities. And I think that's the first thing. Like if you're already mentally setting barriers for yourself, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you have a more growth mindset, if you approach it with curiosity, that right there is the first step, I think. And then after that, just starting small, just chunking it up, focus on the things that like are meaningful for you, and things that work for you. So for example, for some people, it might be just watching movies in another language and like having subtitles for that. For other people, it might be Duolingo and they want something more structured, and that's totally fine as well. For other people, it's let me just go to like that particular community, be it like, for Spanish, for example, if you want to learn Spanish, you could go to like North Philadelphia or South Philadelphia and try to practice there. You could go to another country if you wanted to, and practice there.
Yeah.
But I think it's just trying to figure out like why you want to learn the language and like putting yourself in that situation, like how you could, like once you figure out your why, then the how is kind of easy. Well, not easy, but it's less, it makes the why kind of drives the how, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, just finding the thing that works for you, whether it be formal education, informal education, and just being consistent with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a guest, his name is David Maisels, and he speaks 7 languages.
Oh my.
Yeah, so he spoke multiple languages. Some of them he might somewhat like he's forgetting. It's like it's maintenance mode.
Sure.
But there are other ones that he's completely fluent. And I asked him, what's your like strategy when it comes to learning language? And he mentioned the same thing that you mentioned, was figure out what your goal is, right?
Yeah.
Why do you want to learn that language? And then once you have that goal, hence your why, now you start accumulating content, whether that's through immersions, whether that's watching Netflix in a different language and just reading the subtitles in English, or maybe vice versa. And I think that's very important. I remember, so I studied abroad in Germany.
I was wondering where your German, yeah, okay.
So I studied.
Where in Germany?
I was in Hamburg.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Das ist gut.
Das ist gut. So, and I didn't know any German before going to Germany.
Wow,
And
that's so brave of you to go there.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, my dad wanted me to go there because universities are free. But he doesn't he doesn't realize the language are hard.
Yeah,
So it's
for
very
sure.
difficult. And I remember that when I was going to Germany, it took me 6 months from beginning not knowing any words into 6 months later, I could have a decent conversation with someone.
That's awesome. Wow, that's just a short amount of time.
Yeah. But that's what immersion does to you. I think if someone here, right, they take multiple years of German, it might be a little difficult because once they're outside of that classroom or outside of the test or that timeline, then they go back to their roots of speaking their native language.
For sure.
When I was in Germany, it was constant repetition. It was figuring out words, like the foundations. You start with the pronouns and some verbs, then some greetings, right?
Yeah.
That's usually the foundation of language learning. And eventually you start picking up stuff and connecting the dots and putting sentences structures together and figuring out what the rules are. And afterwards, immersion is such a fast way to learn a language, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure, because there's a real need for it. And I think that's the other, you bring up a really good point, Aldo, where there has to be a need. Communication, when you communicate something, it's because you need something at its very essence. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about households where they're, the parents speak Spanish. In my case, like my household was like at home we speak Spanish, and then like outside you could speak English or whatever. But my brother, he had me, and so like we could speak in English together. And so because of that, unfortunately for him now, as we're older and in hindsight, his Spanish is not as strong as my Spanish, for example, but because there wasn't that need. So that's something really important to also consider. Like, we want to work smarter, not harder, but the problem with that is that if you don't use the language just because you feel like, oh, I'm like weak in it, or I'm not like, feel very confident, then you do lose it.
Yeah.
So creating those opportunities of need, and immersion is a fine example of that, where you really do need the language to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And the consistency helps a lot too. I think it's been a while since I went to Germany. Now that I came back here to the US, I try to figure out how can I still learn the language, or perhaps or have conversations in German to other people. And one thing that I found was that I switch my phone into German.
Yes.
That's the biggest one. So, and even though sometimes I might not understand certain words when they tell me like a notification or anything, I would look it up. And that's one way to do it. Duolingo is another one. And another thing, and we'll talk about community in just a bit, is I found a meetup that is a German meetup that people who learn German or native German speakers would come, and they would have conversations. They would meet in, I think, Brauhaus Schmitz.
Yeah.
In South Street. So having conversations with them there and learning a language it's a fun way to do it. And obviously, I don't go to German school or anything like that, and not pursuing anything related to German, but I want to keep that language still in me.
For sure.
And I think immersing yourself from changing your phone language to meeting people and constantly having conversations, I think that helps a lot.
For sure. Never underestimate the power of informal education. You don't need to go into a class, says the teacher. You don't need to go into a classroom to learn. You can make those learning opportunities, those meaning-making experiences yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about consistency.
Yes. So important. I think it was Des Linden that said that, and I mean, this is the marathon space, but we could really be applied to anything, where she says she has her days where she feels really good. She has her days where she feels like crap, but she just keeps showing up. And that's just so powerful, because it's not going to go well every single time that you do it. I think there was another athlete that said the rule of thirds, where 1/3 of the time it should feel good, 1/3 of the time it should just be okay, and 1/3 of the time, it feels like crap. But if it's skewed in one way or another, you're either not challenged enough or you're too challenged.
Yeah.
But anyway, to go back on all of this, the consistency is just so important, and it's not going to be perfect every single time, but just keep showing up.
Yeah. And talking about keep showing up, and you mentioned a marathon a little bit. You started off as a runner training for marathons before doing this triathlon thing.
That's correct. Yeah. Running is my first love, and I will always love running, particularly distances. Unfortunately, though, it was through training for a race that I'd broken my foot. I was on the Schuylkill River Trail here in Philadelphia. Lovely, lovely trail. I unfortunately wasn't paying attention, and I wish I had a better story. If you ask me how I broke my arm, that's a better story.
Okay.
But how I broke my foot, it's important, because that I tripped over a rock and fell. So there's my boring story for my foot. But that was so pivotal in getting started in triathlon, trying to maintain my fitness through swimming and through cycling. And then realizing, hey, I could actually maybe do something with these two parts, and maybe with the running, once I'm better, do a triathlon. And that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to miss your accolades on the running aspect, because you did a 2015 Boston Marathon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you won the Teacher of the Year award in 2016. So
Yes.
how did you, I think everyone wants to know, it's how did you combine academics accolades and pursuits on top of training? Because for people who are listening, right, or watching, Boston Marathon is kind of a spectacle when it comes to marathons because you got to run a sub 3. You can't just sign up for Boston Marathon and just go.
Right, right,
So
yeah.
there's a requirement there, and sub 3 it's a very difficult for a lot of people, right? So tell us more about how are you have your academic pursuits at the same time have time to train.
Yeah, no, for sure. So in that particular time period, I think for a woman my age, I needed to have, I think it was a sub 335 marathon. And once I, kind of going back earlier to our conversation, once you establish your purpose and you know what you want, then you figure out your how. And, but I didn't want, the athletic to compromise my professional and academic life. So, somebody once told me, you can pick being happy, like happiness, like sleeping in, I guess in my case, or, pursuing your dreams. And so I would just wake up really early and train in the mornings. And that's actually a lifestyle that I've since cultivated in my current day. Now in 2024, I still do the same thing. I get up very early, put in my workouts. It's a lifestyle for me now. I don't even think about it. But back then, that was the beginning of that change. And change is hard.
Absolutely.
But once you make that commitment, and again, if you have your why very present, then the how is easier.
You have a great sense of purpose.
Yes, no, for sure. And that's what gives me motivation. I think it was, I was just speaking with a friend today about Daniel Pink and his research on motivation. And I just think of the acronym MAP: mastery, autonomy, and purpose, and how these three things are so important. And during that period of my life in 2015, 2016, I had these things very, very present. And so in doing so, that's what helped me be able to juggle, my professional life as well as my sporting life. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people talk about these pursuits, I mean, not necessarily have to be like Boston Marathon levels, but at least starting a race, right? Or starting to train for a race. People say, "Oh, I don't have time for that." And in my opinion, it's not that you don't have time for it; it's not in your priority list.
Correct.
And in your story, you made a priority to train for the marathon, whether that's Boston or other marathons that you race. You dedicate time and putting that in your priority, the first thing that you do. And I love working out, especially that's the first thing of the day because it's the hardest thing, right?
For
you
sure.
wake up and you're very comfortable. You're on your bed. It's warm.
Yeah,
And
especially in
then-
the winter.
especially in the winter, right? It gets harder.
Yeah.
And you have to get up. You have to put in whatever sports that you're going to do that morning. Put on the suit. And then afterwards, you have to go outside and be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But I think that after you've done that, whatever training, it becomes easier throughout the day.
For sure. You have to get your body when you're like still kind of sleeping and you haven't fully like realized the decisions that you're making. That's the joke that I make. That's one of the reasons why I go in the morning, because I'm like barely awake and I don't have any regrets. I'm just kind of going through the motions, and it doesn't really hit me until afterwards, like, no, but like, yeah, just starting your day off with like the thing that challenges you. But also too, it doesn't have to be a negative, like, something that's really helped me, and it's going back to that sense of community again, is working out with other people. And so finding a running club that worked with my schedule, but not only that, I just really enjoy the company of the people in my running club. I look forward to starting my day with them. I think that's just so, so powerful. And so I mean, life is hard as it is. Like, you might as well, if you're going to be suffering, you might as well suffer together. So,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think being accountable for other people plays a huge role. And you're talking about like running with other people, but you're also being accountable, right?
Correct.
If you say you're going to wake up at a certain time and we'll meet at a certain time, you have to go, as opposed to when you're alone. It's like, I could do it tomorrow. It's okay.
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. Like, a great thing about a running group is being able to push one another. And I mean, there's been a lot written about running clubs fairly recently. The New York Times wrote an article called The Rise of Running Clubs. There was an op-ed piece also in the New York Times, My Running Club, My Everything. And they really point to how running clubs have, with the unfortunate like lack of, well, with COVID-19 and like a lot of businesses shutting down and places where people like publicly get together, there has been this, or third places as they call it, there has been this rise of third spaces. And running clubs are one of those third spaces where people can just get together and connect. And I'm definitely one of those people. So
They said that, what do you call it? Running club are the dating apps now.
yes. I did see that article too. Yeah, it is a good way to meet people, whether it be, platonic or non-platonic friendship relationships. So yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of the triathlons that you've done, tell us more about like the training that you went into and how difficult that was aligning that, because marathons you could run, right?
Sure.
It's much less maintenance, I would say. It's definitely there's good and bad for each sport, a lot of goods actually. But in a marathon, you may just have a running shoes and you just run, maybe have a watch, right? It's easier. But then when you do triathlon, there's a lot more maintenance, bike maintenance, going to the pool, going to open water, and then adding the running aspect. But tell us more about like the triathlon training. And you mentioned that you broke your foot and then you start going into the bike and swimming.
Yeah.
Tell us more about your first triathlon that you've done.
Sure. So, Aldo, you bring up some great points where access to these things is just so important. And as I've gotten more serious, I've purchased more things. But starting out, I started out very simply because I didn't know if I was going to like it or not. I just wanted to try something new. So that's to say that you don't need to have the flashy bike. You don't need to have the super shoes, like as long as you have the bare minimum of things to get started. I think it's like not only the equipment, but just also the guts to be like, I'm going to jump into this pool and do this. Like, for me personally, it's overwhelming to go to like a new pool and it's like, what's the pool culture there? Like, are there swimmers that are like myself that like, I'm not particularly fast. I'm still not particularly fast.
You're really fast.
Thank you. Just that intimidation factor, that feeling of like, do I belong here? And I think that when you make that first step, like that decision, like I want to try a triathlon, I sign up for a race, right there already, it's like you belong, because otherwise, why would you have signed up, So when you make that decision to sign up, you belong. It doesn't matter how fast or how slow. The fact that you're going and doing these things is amazing. And again, you don't need the fancy stuff. I just looked for plans online. I was seeing what other people were saying. I think going back to the third spaces, social media in this aspect is helpful, where you can go like different message groups and like ask people questions, or you can find resources like free training plans and things like that. And that's how I started. I wanted to go the more budget-friendly route possible because I didn't know if it was something that I would like. And then just kind of going in like, okay, like I'm petrified to go to this new pool, but like I have to get the swim in, and just being brave in those moments is really helpful. Putting yourself out there.
Yeah, putting yourself out there, be uncomfortable. It's okay that intimidating. And we go back to this point of understanding your why. Why? Because I signed up for the race, I paid for it, and
Yeah.
I want to finish it, right?
Exactly,
And I'll
exactly.
figure out the how later.
Exactly. And it's always that first step that's always so hard. There's a learning curve to everything that you do for the first time. Like, the pros, the Olympians now, like they had to start somewhere as well. And sometimes I think about that, like, especially when I was just actually talking to a friend recently about this bike ride that I did yesterday, and the people that I was riding with, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe like I'm riding with this person. I remember when I was introduced to them a couple of years ago and thinking like, oh my God, they're so fast. And they still are. That person is still very fast. But like, I'm like, wow, like I can sort of keep up with them now. So I'm saying this not to, like, oh, good job, Maria. But it's more like you kind of forget like how much you've grown. And we're always looking forward, and we're always looking for like, okay, like what's the next thing? What's the next thing? But sometimes it's good to like see where you are now and like look back and be like, oh, like I have grown so much as an athlete. And so, especially like the first time that I got on a bike and, tried going up a hill and I couldn't figure it out and I would have to walk it, like to now. So just being patient with yourself, you'll get there. Like if you're consistent, if you're tenacious, you will get to that point where you're really surprise yourself.
That's awesome. And speaking about getting to that point, tell us the transition from that to World Championship.
So after I did my first try, I realized, you know what, I do like this. I like challenging myself in a way that I wouldn't normally challenge myself. And so that's when I started buying, the more upgraded things. That's when I hired a coach because I got more serious. I joined my local triathlon club in Philadelphia, T3 Philly.
That's awesome.
So just being surrounded by people that were encouraging, that kind of had the same lifestyle that I did, was really, really helpful. And it was through that, and then, I had all the pieces in place. Now I had to go and do the actual work. Again, going back to that why and then the how. And my regimen now is like 3 times for everything. So 3 swims, 3 bike rides, 3 runs. I strength train twice a week. Again, all under the careful eye of a coach to make sure I'm not overdoing it because that's what works for me.
Sure.
I just kept setting the bar higher and higher and higher to the point where I was so incredibly grateful and thankful to have qualified for Kona, the World Championships for Ironman for women last year in 2023. This year I had my sights set for Ironman World Championships 70.3 in New Zealand, and I qualified for that. So I'll be doing that in December. So never say never. You might be able to check off things off of your bucket list.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for most people, right, it's about setting the bar higher. Now that you've done the showing up aspect, now that you are learning along the way, make mistakes, and you want to set the bar even higher because you're already there, like you're already at the standard. Now you want to go a little bit of above margin.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I think that's what you've done where, okay, I like it. And I made a mistake. I have my own structure, but I need to get better.
For
so
sure.
you hire out coaches, you have better equipments. And I think most people, they want to get the nicer equipment and they want to get the coach first, but they haven't put in the work yet.
Yeah.
So start from level 1 and then work yourself up into I guess Kona now.
Yeah. That growth mindset is just so important. I really just go back to that, and just one of the reasons that I keep going back to triathlon, like I said, is just what else do I have in me? How else can I push myself? Like, how can I express like my humanity in its, fullest splendor? With the academic, I love it. It's intellectually very stimulating. but also too, like, what can I do for my body that is also stimulating? And triathlon has been the answer so far.
Yeah, I have this quote here, and you actually put this in your Instagram. So
Oh.
I'll give credit to you here, and I'll give credit to the person at the end. So we do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside us something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust. Once we believe in ourselves, we can risk curiosity, wonder, and spontaneous delight, or any experience that reveals the human spirit. E. Cummings.
Yes, yes. I really love that quote so much.
Yeah. And how do you push yourself in a race or just in training? Because these are not 30 minutes. These are not an hour, right? Sometimes they are, depending on where you are in your training. But how do you push yourself when you're in a race and you're like just finishing the swim, right, for example, and then you're like, oh, I got to go to this 100-mile, 112-mile bike ride, and then there's a marathon after. Like, how do you push yourself for that?
For sure. So with something so long, like an Ironman that takes up like a whole day, it's so easy to get overwhelmed and to think, oh man, I'm only, 30 minutes in, I have 12 more hours to go or whatever else. But just kind of like acknowledging the thought and then just zooming in and just being like, no, just stay present. Like for the swim, it's like just swim to the next buoy. For the bike, I break that up by my intervals of when I can drink water or have my nutrition or, I pick a landmark or something like that. And through another friend, I recently learned if I'm feeling uncomfortable to focus on my breathing, to really think about breathing. Because the way that he put it was when your body's not getting the oxygen that it wants, it starts panicking. And so it can lead to like these like negative thoughts that sometimes we have. So if you find yourself in a negative thought, like just, it's like, okay, you're having the thought. It's just a thought. It's not the truth. It's just a thought, and focus on your breathing. Stay present. I like to think of, I look at three things. I try to hear two things and then try to feel one thing. And I will kind of go through that mentally. In a race as well, like if something's hurting, I think about the parts that are not hurting. And so I'll like move my thumbs. So sometimes you'll see me like in my pictures, I'm like this.
It's like, I'm actually in pain, but
Yeah.
this is...
But I'm like, okay, I'm in pain. Wiggle your thumbs. Your thumbs don't hurt. And so, so doing something like that. So taking the focus away from something else, breathing, remembering why I'm there, being present. And if my mind needs to wander, I'll think about like the moments that make me happy, that made me happy while training. And that usually involves the people that I'm with. And so I'll dedicate like a portion to, somebody from my running club from South Philly Striders or somebody from T3 or, a family member or a friend. My community has helped me get to the starting line. But not only that, but they're mentally with me throughout the whole event as well.
That's awesome. And I have this quote from you.
I love quotes.
I know you do. And this is a quote from you. And yeah, I think you wrote this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Events like these force me to live in the present and through the pain. It reminds me that I am alive. If my mind does wander, it does what is important in my life, or I guess I should say who is important. Although they may not be here with me at the time, I feel so connected to my loved one and their memories give me strength. My community is with me even though they might not be physically here.
Yes, that is me. That really encapsulates just everything that I had discussed now. I think we're more than ourselves. I think if we only think of the self, we're so limited. But if we kind of open ourselves to also those that are around us, it just makes life so much more than what it is. And we just have a bigger appreciation for it and a richer life for sure.
Yeah. Tell us more about the community that you're in and how's that help you in pursuing greater achievements?
For sure. So, you know, I'm going to really loosely paraphrase this, but like, the people that you're around really greatly influence, like, you know, what you want to do and how you think of yourself and whatnot. And so I try to find people that are, similarly minded, and it's not been easy. Like finding adult friendships, it is really, really challenging. And I'm from the area too. What compounds it is like people have different priorities, and that's
Yes.
totally okay. Like, you know, people shift to family or to career. So it's hard to maintain friendships, but you also have to put yourself out there.
Yes.
And one way that's helped me is by finding these running clubs, finding triathlon clubs. Yeah, just you kind of have to try to keep. It's kind of like when you get your hair cut. Like you don't just go to any stylist. Like you try to find the stylist that works for you, that works for your hair. Just because they're qualified to cut hair doesn't mean they're qualified to cut your hair.
Yep.
So if you go to and the running club thing, it took a while. There were a couple of clubs that I joined. I put myself out there, and I'm like, you know what? There's something a little. It just didn't work for me.
Sure.
It wasn't a good fit.
Sure.
And that's okay. It's just hard not to get discouraged. I will say that. But once you find, you know, your people, it just makes all the difference. And so it's through the relationships that I've cultivated that, like, you know, seeing, you know, oh, so-and-so, you know, is really motivating me to do this. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, like my triathlon club, you know, we decided, okay, we're going to do this race like next year. And there's like 8 people that have signed up already. And so like, you're like, okay, well, you know, I guess I should sign up too. So that kind of positive peer pressure, that support, like.
I like that, positive peer pressure.
It really drives you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. And that's the other thing with training. Like, I love running with other people because if I were by myself, I'd be like, I don't know if I want to do this hill. Like, I'm going to take my time or whatever else. But if you're with others, you really do push yourself. You're inspired to push yourself. And if you're with the right group of people, they will support you and you'll support them. And so that's something that I really, as a teammate, as a club member, but also as a team leader, or club leader, I've tried to like instill. It's just so important.
Yeah. I think you bring up 2 great points here. One is as you get older, right, it's often difficult to find friends just because when you're in college years, everybody's available.
Yes.
Outside of their activities or maybe school or classes, pretty much they're available all the time. Mm-hmm. But then once you get into starting a real world, right? You have jobs, you have obligations, and it gets a little bit more difficult. And then once you get older, you have kids and bigger responsibilities and maybe other family members or maybe businesses, things like that. It gets even harder.
Yeah.
And I think that is really hard to perhaps network with other people and trying to put yourself out there. That's why thank God we live in a first world country here, right? That there's meetups.com or there's groups in local groups in a city, depending where you are, you can network out there and put yourself in uncomfortable situations, but you're able to make friends and cultivate friendships that way.
For sure. And
the second thing that you make a really good point is that surround yourself with the right people, right? You can surround yourself with the wrong people and you're going to be the 6th person to do the wrong thing. Right? Yeah. But if you surround yourself and people who are better than you, right? If they say if you're the smartest in a room, then you're in the wrong room. Mm-hmm. But if you're the fastest in a room, then you're probably in the wrong room too. Yeah. So in this instance, you surround yourself with people who have the similar mindset, the similar goals. And, you know, when I first learned about T3, I already knew kind of a background of being surround yourself with the right people. I came from, you know, the real estate industry, and I first started on that because I went to that meetup with a bunch of other real estate investors. Mm-hmm. And I put that same experience into when I signed up for my first triathlon. I was like, all right, there's no way. Like, I don't know anything. You know, okay, what is Training Peaks? What is Garmin?
Yeah.
Right? What is a Strava? And
Yeah.
and I knew that if I dedicate my time into just, going into a triathlon group, and that's what I did. I was like, triathlon group in Philly, saw T3, sign up for it. And I was like, oh, you guys have a track Tuesday. And then I remember showing up, I was like, oh, hey guys, it's like, yeah, I'm actually training for my first triathlon. I was like, oh, what's your first? A half Ironman? And I don't know how to train for it.
Yeah, yeah.
So being around yourself with them, and everyone was legitimately like faster. And I'm like, holy hell, there's a different breed here. And the fact that I already woke up early, and I know working out in the morning is very essential. And I found other people, including yourself, who actually done the same thing. And I'm like, okay, I'm in the right space here. And just having conversations with multiple different people, asking advice. And that is what's important, because if you are by yourself, it might take a long time for you to get where you are.
Sure.
Obviously, in a race, you might cut down maybe, but like it might take a longer time for you to understand what works.
For sure.
But if you're align yourself with other people who have done it in the past. For example, I think you have done, when I first joined, like you have done your share of triathlons and marathons, and having conversations with you, having conversation with other people, asking the right questions. And it's like, oh, what are your tips on this? And you guys helped me, and I took action on it, and that helped tremendously into finishing the triathlon. So that helped.
Great.
The community aspect truly does help, and it is important to align yourself with the right people.
For sure.
And in the right group.
For sure. And I think going with that, the right group is where you can feel vulnerable, and you can ask those questions. It feels safe to ask those questions. Again, like, we all have to start from somewhere. Like, don't feel silly that you're asking something that might be like painfully obvious, because it's not. Like, sometimes it just isn't obvious. I mean, it's more, I don't have to think about certain things anymore because I've been in the game for a while, but like, it wasn't always this way. So that just goes to anybody who wants to try anything new, like, ask questions, even if it seems silly, because there's somebody that's willing to help you and can help you answer that question, so you're not by yourself.
Yeah. And, speaking of understanding your why first, like your goal, and then figuring out things after, you might know what bike to get, or you might know where to swim or where to run. But then if you surround yourself with the right people, then you're actually in a better direction if you are doing your own research.
Yeah.
And I have this quote here from Helen Keller: "Alone we can do so little, together can do so much."
Yes. I had written that in a race recap. Yeah.
And what are your tips on someone that first starting a triathlon? Any tips on, like, okay, I just signed up for my race, now what?
Honestly, find yourself a group of people. Like I said, I mean, I know that we can be limited by geography. I have to acknowledge that, living in Center City, Philadelphia, finding a triathlon group that's based in Center City, Philadelphia is huge. But for those that might live in a more rural area, just finding, like, through social media, groups. So for example, I'm in Team Varlo, and that is more, the virtual component is so essential, and connecting through other teammates through like a Facebook group or Discord or whatever has been really helpful. Like, that's how I met my coach, actually. I was out in Arizona, and another friend who I was visiting my friend Lee.
I miss Lee.
So my friend April and I went to go visit Lee, and he's like, oh, well, there's other Team Varlo people here. You can meet them. And Rachel Zelinskas was one of those people. She's a pro triathlete. And we just hit it off immediately. And so had it not been for Team Varlo, I would not have been able to connect with her. So that's to say, again, that, like, you don't have to join, like, a team that's, like, hyper local if that doesn't exist for you, or if they weren't a good fit for you. There are all these other opportunities out there Like I said, Team Varlo is one example. There's also like, Team Zoot. I don't want to like just, but there's these other triathlon teams that you can join. And as we talked about, you really can gain so much. Your experience is like so much more enhanced when you have a community of people like that are supporting you and behind you.
That's awesome. What are your next kind of accomplishments? I know you mentioned in New Zealand, but what are your, I guess, in the next year or so, outside of races? You mentioned that you want to be part of more community building.
That's correct. Yeah, I think kind of going back to what I said before about moving away from the self and just kind of thinking about the other and how it greatly enhances even your own human experience. I've kind of hit that point in my life where the PRs are great. I love, seeing what I'm capable of, but what else can I do for somebody else? So, for example, right now I am working with Varlo as their community activation specialist, and we're trying to build community within right now we're focusing on hyperlocal, Cooper River Park, having a running group there, but also like partnering with other groups, with other events, seeing where that takes us. And then just doing more mentorship, I guess, is where I see myself. And just really thinking about that, like kind of blending my interests in sense of community building. I know right now is the classroom, but I'd like to see what that looks like in sport and in these other third spaces that are so important for us. How can we enhance like what we know from research? How can we further enhance these experiences for other people? And in my case, I'm interested particularly in the world of sport. So
what is a third space?
So a third space, we've lost our third places. This is where the research first started. So first space would be home, second space would be work, a third, I keep alternating space and place. First place, home, second place, work, third place is wherever you congregate. So if, for example, you are a religious person, it could be your local church or temple, place of worship, but also to like coffee shops, parks. These are all third places. A third space doesn't necessarily have to be a physical space. So social media could be a third space, or like events. So running groups, running clubs. It's not like you're at a place, you make the space. And I mean, I'm focusing a lot on the athletic, but if any kind of affinity group that you have, like if you're in a book club, you make a third space by, essentially getting together and talking about like a book or sewing club or whatever it is that you're interested in. And I think as people, as humans, we are social animals and we want these things. We crave these things, generally speaking. So it's just so important for our own development and our own humanity to have these spaces.
Yeah, not just at home, but not just at home at work, but also being out there, whatever interest that you might have, join those groups, be part of that community, and develop a relationship that way, because outside of the relationship that you develop, there's other relationship that the people within the group can have that can connect you with other people as well. Yeah,
for sure. Like it's exciting to think about like how many more friends you could be making like 5 years from now. Like I didn't expect to be where I am now, and I'm just so grateful. I have so much gratitude, and I'm excited to see where things will be 5 years from now.
That's awesome. We're getting at the end of the show here, and I asked the same question I asked everyone else. The reason I named the show Kaizen Blueprint, Kaizen, the Japanese term for continuous development. What are some things that you do on a daily basis? And we mentioned a couple, whether that's habits, systems, tools that have benefit you that could benefit other people.
I think right now the biggest thing that this was Michael Phelps, I think, that said this, that whenever he walks through a doorway, he thinks of something positive about himself. And so the reason I think that's just so important is because the conscious mind can hold one positive thought or the conscious mind can hold one thought at a time, and to make it a positive one. I think we're just I'm extremely hypercritical of myself. That has its advantages, but a lot of times it's draining, and there are disadvantages to that kind of mindset. And so kind of speaking to yourself as if you were as if you're speaking to your best friend, like when you're that hype person for somebody else. So that self-talk, I'm really trying to change how I frame things. And one way to do that is to make it a habit, to be consistent. And so if I see something like a doorway, in the case of Michael Phelps, to be like, oh, like, I'm feeling really healthy. I'm feeling really strong. I'm feeling really good, or something like that. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for most of us, right, when we see something, it's always like a negative thought. It's
yes.
That might be good. This might not be good for me because of X.
Right.
And I think in your instance, just think about the positive. Think about the glass half full rather than half empty.
Right.
And it is important to do so in many attributes, right? Whether that's pursuing an interest, that's pursuing something new, or dealing with a change. Think about the positive that's going to happen as opposed to the negative that might happen.
Right, exactly. I saw in a meme somewhere where a negative thought or overthinking is a conspiracy theories that you're making about yourself.
Yeah.
And so, and again, I acknowledge those thoughts. It's just part of, our human condition, but also it takes balance. I'm not saying I'm looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, but it's also the pendulum kind of swings more towards the negative for me. I want something more holistic. Let's try to focus on some of the positive, just so to have a happier, healthier life.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to think that you have the negative mindset because every time I see you, you're always this cheerful, happy person. So it's hard to imagine. I don't think she's hypercritical.
No. You have the happy face. You project happiness, but sometimes you don't know what people are really thinking. And so that's what I mean about giving yourself grace and just giving yourself permission, to fail or whatever else. But also too, like I said, not just focusing on the negative all the time, but also realize that you need balance and you need to think positively, as well. So just have that one positive thought at whatever, if you see a plant, something positive.
That's awesome. Maria, where can people find more about you?
So there are numerous ways. I guess there's my Instagram handle, MFP131. You can just request my friendship. You can start there. And let's just keep it simple. Starting there, I'm happy to meet new people, talk to new people. Strava as well is another way you can find me. I'm Maria P. from Philly.
And her Strava is stacked. Just giving everyone a heads up. But Maria, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a positive experience.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Awesome.